Hello Gamers Network. We're going to try something a little different today. Before we get into any of it, I'd like to point out that this is being recorded on my laptop's default video program on my laptop's webcam with a cheap $20 headset I bought at Walmart sitting on my keys picking up the sound. If the quality isn't that great, it's probably because the materials aren't exactly high end. If you have any comments or suggestions for things that I could do to improve the quality, not opposed to checking them out. And depending on how well these are received, I might be able to look into getting something better, maybe a better camera or better mic. It all depends on what the reception for this is and whether or not there's an interest for it. I would also like to point out that I don't have the interest, the time, or the skills to edit this, so pretty much anytime you see me on camera, it's going to end up being one shot, one go, and there's not going to be much editing. I don't have any plans for an intro, I don't have any plans for an outro. This is pretty much going to be recorded and put up. If there's anybody who's really interested in trying out some editing stuff, who wants to make this look better, I'm not opposed to trying to work something out with you so that I can record the videos and send them your way, and you can go from there. As far as what my plans are, it'll be very basic. The point is going to be to get these out to you and keep them brief. So I guess that brings me to what exactly is this? Well, a few people have been asking me lately, and I decided I was going to finally get around to trying out making videos. The goal is to try and make them relatively frequently for the rest of the summer, see how I like them, see whether or not there's an interest and an audience for them, and just make a few 5, maybe 10-minute videos, but closer to 5 minutes, just to keep myself on a tighter leash as far as brevity is concerned, and address some topics. For the most part, unless it's something that I really want to talk about, I'm going to try and get the topics from you guys, from suggestions through Facebook, comments on the YouTube page, or stuff that gets posted in Gamers Network. So if you have something that you'd like me to talk about for a little bit, put it up there and I'll consider it. I am going to try and keep them pretty close to the 5-minute mark, just to challenge myself to talk about stuff that doesn't need to be going on and on about. As a result, the topics aren't going to be something that requires in-depth background or sort of my go-to analysis about whatever. I'm going to try and keep it just my thoughts, where I think things are going, what I think about whatever we're going to talk about that day. If the interest is for something a little more meatier, I can do that. If the interest is for something more brief, then the questions are going to have to reflect that and be shorter things that I can talk about. Maybe that means that I cover news stories or specific game releases. I don't know. We can play it by ear and see how it all works out. Today is going to be a little bit different because the beginning part of the video is going to be explaining this, and then the second part of the video is going to be an actual topic episode thing. I do want to point out that the point of this is not to replace the Gamers Network podcasts from last year. We do have plans to bring those back. I think right now there's plans for an E3 recap, and hopefully it won't be another 3-hour long one. We're trying to keep those closer to an hour, maybe an hour and a half. But the goal is to have this be something that just I do. And if there's still interest within the staff to keep putting on podcasts, then we're going to keep doing that. So this is a separate thing. This isn't the new podcast. This is just its own thing. Without further ado, I'm going to get into the topic for the day, which is dead genres. We actually originally were going to do a podcast on this topic, and myself, Rainey, Sean, Merce, Tyler, and Kevin Skip Rollins. I know he's not on staff. That's the reason why I mentioned him there. Got together and we had a Skype conversation. We talked about dead genres for about 2 hours, and then found out that something went wrong with the recording, so we don't have a podcast for you. And it just didn't work out for us to sit down and try and talk about it again. So I'm going to try and give you the synopsis of what we were talking about. First of all, as far as what dead genres are or aren't, there's no such thing. The idea of what people talk about is whether or not they are dead in the mainstream, whether or not big companies are making the games anymore. Because if you want to make a game and you don't mind not having somebody pay the hours for you to make it, you're going to make a game that you're going to want to play. So the indie community will keep this stuff alive. That's why you've seen a lot of stuff like FTL and Binding of Isaac bring back roguelikes. Why you've seen stuff like Super Meat Boy and Braid bring back a more diverse platforming market, where in the mainstream it's been more dominated by Mario and Sonic, and more recently Rayman. Why you've seen point-and-click adventure games be basically Machinarium, and allowing Telltale to sort of show up as a niche company and put something out that's really impressive. It's because if you want to make the game, you will. And the indie community, while the quality might not necessarily be there, chances are you can find any genre in the indie community. It just might not necessarily live up to your expectations or what you would hope to be able to accomplish as far as that genre is concerned. So if anybody out there is complaining that their favorite games aren't made anymore, you need to be looking harder, because they're probably being made by someone somewhere, and that person would be very, very grateful for you to pay them, because they didn't make any money by just making it. They only get their money from selling it. So definitely look those up if there's something there that you feel like you're missing from the mainstream. The other thing that we were talking about is why specific genres sort of faded away. And what we came to the conclusion of is they lose popularity when they make a mistake as far as design trends go that lead them away from what made it popular and moving in the first place. And it's sort of hard for people to pick up on that at the time. It's really easy to follow the design trends because that may or may not be what's selling, or that may or may not be what's making something else popular. And I feel like we're going to see that in some of the popular genres these days over the next 5 or 10 years. Some of them are going to fall out of fashion, and we're just going to have to deal with that and see the indie community pick up some slack. But as far as what formerly popular mainstream titles have done, it's usually something as simple as following the trends. For example, the mascot platformers that used to be a huge deal on the NES and SNES, they went away pretty much because it got too easy to make them, and people stopped buying them, not because they started dropping in quality, but because the goal to make them more and more impressive and more ambitious led them to sort of lose that substance and quirkiness about them that made any mascot platformer a good time. And the indie community has responded to that by replacing maybe some of the quirkiness of some of the NES and SNES era games with some more thought-provoking thought-provoking sort of stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be deep, but a lot of the really popular platformer games these days, Braid and Limbo, for example, are games that have done something with the platforming mechanic besides jump on things. And I think going forward, that genre is going to be best improved by people taking the approach of how can I use platforming to tell my story, but not necessarily make it about the platforming. As far as what other sort of dead genres have done, you get text adventures, which were really, really good for providing you a ton of control and a ton of story, but the controls never really got more intuitive than finding the right word. games, and it stopped being something that you could solve through puzzle. It had to be something where you understood puzzle games, or not puzzle games, text adventures. And obviously, being in text, they never got more aesthetically pleasing as graphics improved. Adventure games really stopped focusing on the stories and these incredible worlds that were enveloping themselves around the player, and started really being associated with arbitrary puzzles. And when you do that, the entire game becomes about arbitrary puzzles, and the motivation for the player to pick it up and to go through that just sort of disappears. Roguelikes sort of forgot how to make dying fun and how to make trying again after you died fresh. A lot of games, if you were to have a permanent death in something like Mass Effect, you'd call bullshit. You wouldn't put that much time back into it again. But for roguelikes, they have to do something with Binding of Isaac or with FTL, where the gameplay itself is engaging, and the world that you're exploring, it's about the exploration. So trying again just means you get more to do. And Spaceflight Sims is one of the other ones that we sort of wanted to touch on. They went away largely because we got better at simulation and didn't know how to simulate space. And I think if more people could take the approach of less sim and more space, that we'd figure out how to make those games fun again. We'd figure out how to make something like an X-Wing game pop up out of nowhere and blow everybody's mind. Because right now the technology to do a flight simulator is there, and it's fantastic, but the controls are a huge barrier to entry, and a lot of people just aren't interested in checking them out. So if we could figure out a way to take the approach of putting the player in space with something that felt like you were in space without making it seem one-dimensional and something that you could just sit down once and get that experience, if somebody could find a way to really pull the player into that idea, I think we could see those come back in the next 5 years. That's the majority of what we talked about. So I'm glad to finally get that information out to you guys. I know a couple of people wanted us to talk about dead genres, and unfortunately the logistics of it just didn't work out for us to actually be able to get that information to you. So I hope you liked this video, and I hope you have some ideas for me for the next one. It will be much shorter. I'll be shooting for 5 minutes. I'm going to try and keep it at a 10-minute max at absolute most, if the topic requires it. But I think that about does it, and I'll happily respond to anybody who has comments on the video or comments on the thread. I will be posting this to the Gamers Network Facebook page. If you're not a member of Gamers Network and you stumbled onto this and have any interest in being there, participating in discussions like this, you can find us at www.facebook.com/groups/thegn. I'll try and provide a link in the description. Talk to you guys later.